Concealing Shroud. I love this card. I think this is great. One of the big problems with games like Duelyst, where you can't interact in your opponent's turn, is that there's sometimes just nothing you can reasonably do about a combo that's in your opponent's deck. Not necessarily that's in their hand or on their board, but in their deck. Hearthstone has a huge, huge problem with this, where there are some classes, some entire classes, that struggle against your opponent just having a way to deal 30 in their deck. 30 being your starting life total in Hearthstone. Like, there are combos that, or even just large handfuls of burn, that are very difficult to play around. There's one faction that has a card that can protect you for a turn when that happens, and I really like that an effect like that has made its way into Duelyst. I also really like that you have to use it preemptively. I think, so the card in Hearthstone is called Ice Block, and it triggers when you would die, and then it protects you for that turn. Concealing Shroud you have to use preemptively. So your opponent can wait until you don't have it up to go off. And if you want to survive for multiple turns, you have to draw it more. The flip side is that it's cheap. This game has Alchemist Lawmaster in it to recur them, and you can use it to get in an extra hit from your general for free when the turn you play it. So it even deals two free damage to something of your choice, which is pretty sweet. Like, deal 2 damage, you become invincible is like a pretty awesome deal for 2 mana. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this card, and I think it's a very good thing to have in the game. Like, it's fun to play with, and it's fun to play against. Like, it's interesting. You're like, oh, damn it, why did they do that? That's so annoying. I don't have a Dispel. Of course, aggro decks being less likely to run Dispel also means they're less likely to be able to stop this. So it's quite a reliable effect, and I enjoy that. I think it does its job well. Speaking of cards that do their job well, Frigid Corona. I think this is a subtly brilliant design. Normally I use Frigid Corona to freeze my opponent on the first turn, or the first turn when I have mana to spare, which allows me to take the center of the battlefield in the early turns. That's good because it turns on all my infiltrate cards, which Vanar rely on and which have historically had a big problem with actually getting enabled. So between this and Gravity Well, you now have a bunch of ways of carrying your presence, as it were, like the real estate that you control on the board, across to your opponent's side very early on when you're setting up and trying to deploy your little infiltrate minions before they become irrelevant or hard to use. The fact that it also acts as a really good defensive play, like stunning a big minion, even one that's next to you, is another way of playing around Divine Bond that doesn't cost you a card or too much mana. It's not a big opportunity cost. And it's a cantrip that powers up combo-y or spell-heavy Vanar decks by drawing through your deck for you and having a relevant effect along the way. So I like this. It fills in a lot of holes for a defensive or tempo-y Vanar decks. And the aggro deck can still play it as well, but I like that it fits into the other decks really well, all of them. I think Vanar is a faction with a lot of depth. Part of that is their amazing removal suite, just letting them play basically anything they want because they have the removal to get away with it. But part of it is stuff like this, cool Storly cards that let them troll the opponent and get their own way in subtle ways. And I think Frigid Corona is a really good addition to that stable. Enfeeble, I like this card a lot. A big issue typically with games like this is that when your opponent gets multiple large minions out, there's nothing you can actually do about it. There are very few ways in Duelyst or in Hearthstone, or even sometimes in Magic, to deal with a big board of minions. In Magic, there are proper board wipes. Like, Circle of Desiccation in Magic is a 4 or 5 mana. That's obviously too good for Duelyst, but instead we can have cards like Enfeeble. So Enfeeble is great because you can use it just to kill one Ironcliff Guardian, and it's only 3 mana, so that's not a big deal. Or you can use it to mess up your opponent's entire board. It's symmetrical, so you can't get too much advantage out of that, but at the same time you can buff your Gravity Wells with it, which is a neat little interaction that feels very Vanar-y. It's good with walls. Cards that are good with walls are very Vanar-y. And it also allows you to either use a Scorn or just attacking with your stuff, your general, to clear out a large portion of the enemy forces. But in doing that, you've still had to spend a card and some mana, and then your attack's doing that. So you can't kill everything, deploy a new threat, and hit them in the face. You have to spend that time on clearing out their minions if you want to actually properly get rid of them. So I like this as, again, primarily a defensive card. It's a bit situational, like it's kind of clunky, because if you have a minion on board, there's very few good situations to use it unless they have an overwhelming board presence. And so again, I like that it doesn't fit into the aggro decks very well, because they're usually the ones with the minions. I'm generally a big fan of new cards that don't fit in aggro decks, but are efficient and cheap. Because there's always a big problem that the aggro decks just get more and more and more efficient as more cards are released into a CCG. And so I love to see, especially as Vanar aggro is already so good, and I just love to see cards that support other archetypes without being 6 mana clunkfest. Like Necrotic Sphere, really cool card, but it's so clunky. But stuff like this, Frigid Corona, Concealing Shroud, great cards, cheap cards. You can play them along with other cards in the same turn. You can make tempo swings, even when you're on the back foot, even when you're massively behind on board, without having to be an aggro deck, without having to just go face and try and ignore their board. And I think that's very valuable. I like Circle of Desiccation for the exact same reason. You can't play that in an aggro deck, but it's a big reset for a controlling deck that can also leave you ahead if you've got Obelisks on board. As every Vitruvian card should do, right? Myriad. I've been quite disappointed by this card. I really want to play it with Kara, but the fact that you don't get to buff the 3/3 before you make the wall, or you have to not make the wall if you want to buff the 3/3, is just so awkward. Plus, because it's small and relatively fragile, you kind of have to play it defensively, and then the wall ends up somewhat useless, and it doesn't really do anything, and I ended up cutting those fairly quickly from the deck I was playing them in, which makes me sad. I think Myriad is a cool card. Maybe if you could place the wall manually, it would be good. I don't know if that's like okay from a UI perspective. There's probably a good reason why it makes a random wall instead, but I think this sort of effect, like this card is cool and it has a lot of potential, but it's not good enough, and that's a shame. Like it's not really worth playing. It's probably okay in Gauntlet, but even then it's probably only merely okay. And even the fact that it triggers Vesper synergies doesn't really redeem it. The fact that it nombos with Kara's Bloodborn spell is just so frustrating. Like that clash. It's like the opposite of I was enthusing about Sunbreaker earlier. This is the opposite. It's a design that doesn't work with the thing it's meant to work with, like with itself, as it were. Its ability is self-contradictory. So I'd love to see some kind of change to that. Not sure what, but it would be cool. Sleet Dasher. This card is really scary. Really, really scary. I don't know if Vanar needed this. We've given them Enfeeble, and they've already got Frostburn and Aspect of the Fox and the rest of it. I don't know if they needed this as well. Like Sleet Dasher Boundless Courage is so bonkers. Or I've just realised while doing this, Sleet Dasher with Enfeeble. Oh no, that doesn't work, does it? Because you'd have to like Enfeeble and play the Sleet Dasher, and then next turn clean up the one. So no, ignore that. Yeah, Sleet Dasher Boundless Courage is the big deal. And it's very hard to play around, I've found. Especially as even if you do manage to take position out of range, the Vanar player can just wait a turn to go off, or use a Hearth Sister to pull a minion into position. And once they do, they kill all your stuff and hit you for 5. And that's not cool. It's the kind of the opposite of what I was enthusing about with Enfeeble. It's a board clear, which I'm fine with those existing, obviously. But it leaves you with a big minion, hits the opponent in the face for damage, and gives you an advantageous board position. Enfeeble requires too much setup to achieve that effect, and is normally a lot more situational and clunky. Circle of Desiccation is too expensive. Sleet Dasher, basically its only weakness is things with a toughness of 6 or more, which is a lot, It's not very hard to make sure that's not the case, especially with Vanar's plethora of chip damage. So, I actually really like this card from on its own. If it wasn't for Boundless Courage, which again kind of breaks the rule that I was talking about with Force Field earlier, where when you do things in Duelyst, you have to pay for it, like you have that attritional aspect. If it wasn't for Boundless Courage, I think it would be fine. It would be sweet. You'd buff it and then you'd hit things and it would die. But with Boundless Courage, because you just get all that for free, effectively, it's just it's so dominating, and it feels so bad to be on the receiving end of. I think I'd be in favor of a rework for this card. It's not taking over the world right now. Like, it's probably hard enough to set up that combo that it's not like, again, it's not ruining the meta, but nor is Variax, right? But I think it's probably worth tweaking it, just so on the off chance that a deck featuring it doesn't end up getting really powerful. It doesn't, it doesn't, like, the combo itself doesn't feel very dualisty. It doesn't feel right. It's too efficient. It's too free. Where you just get to make a 5/6, hit them in the face, take no damage on said 5/6, kill all this stuff. Like, that's cool in concept. It's sweet, and it does take setup. It does, it is hard enough to pull off. But the fact that you get to keep the 5/6 along the way, that's what bugs me. Things like the Battle Pando combo, that's in a similar position where you play Battle Pando, Death Strike Seal, and Inner Focus, or some other way of dealing damage to it. The fact that the Pando survives and you have to kill it is what makes that combo egregious to my mind. Like, I think that you shouldn't generally be able to get a board clear that also makes a big minion with the same board clear, and still, gives you free mana. Like, with Sleep Dasher, once you have it in play, it's only 2 mana to play Boundless Courage. You can play the rest of your turn as normal. So I think that's like a bit, almost like cheating, for only a 2-card combo. Finally, Grandmaster Embler. I adore this card. It's really sweet and surprisingly powerful. So, I built a deck that, if you've seen me enthusing about it on Reddit, you might already know about this. I built a deck that played Grandmaster Embler and Razorback. And I put Jack's True Sight in it, because Jack's True Sight's great with Razorback. And then I thought, okay, let's make it a Kara deck, because Kara's great with Razorback and with Walls, which Embler has, and then I can play the Gravity Wells that I've got, and maybe I can play the Glacial Elemental and Bone Chill Barrier combo, blah blah blah. Start playing. At some point, I use Kara's Bloodborn spell and Grandmaster Embler, and I surround my opponent with buffed up walls. And then a couple of turns later, I realized that I've been missing lethal this entire time, because I've just surrounded my opponent with like 18 damage, while waiting for a Razorback to win. And it turns out that Kinetic Surge plus Embler as a 9-mana play is nuts. You get a load of walls, some of which might be 4/4, so they don't die to Plasma Storm. You get a 6/6, and you threaten, at minimum, 14 power next turn, with 8 1-power walls and Embler herself. In practice, at least one of them will be a 4/4, and often more than one, so you're looking at lethal, like, regardless. So unless your opponent can clear one and move out of the way, you will win. Your Embler will kill them. The card is really powerful, and it's just kind of a sweet way to win, because again, the opponent can play a Dispel or an AoE to get out of the lock, of the big pile of walls. And in fact, I was making a video the other day that I wanted to upload, but sadly the mic wasn't configured properly, so it was lost to the ages, which is a real shame, because I played Grandmaster Embler, and my opponent beat it, and a couple of turns later me, by playing Flaming Stampede. Literally the first time I've ever seen anyone cast Flaming Stampede. I was so amazingly blown out. It was ridiculous. Outside of Flaming Stampede, there aren't really very many good answers to this. So, if Embler takes off in the meta, guys, Flaming Stampede, that's the tech. That's the way to do it. All that aside, I think this card it's so Vanar. It pins them down. It plays well with Bloodborne spells, Kara's Bloodborne spell. It makes walls, which is a Vanar thing. Some of them will be Vespers, because they'll be Bone Chill barriers, so you get your Glacial Elemental triggers. It's got synergy. It locks them in place to give you board advantage. Again, that's very Vanar. They've got that sort of ice freeze prison thing going on. It's annoying. They have to use removal on the walls just to get out of the prison. So you get card advantage, which is sweet. And if they can't escape, you kill them. So it's just a really cool card that, again, asks a big question of your opponent, which I think is entirely fine of like an 8 mana or 9 mana play, just like Excelsius. But I think it's probably better than Excelsius because it just works. You don't have to, and Embla herself is not vulnerable to a point removal spell. So, yeah, I think it's like a cool, well-designed, fun win condition for a cool, well-designed, fun deck that is slow Vanar, which again benefits so much from some of these additions. I'm just really enjoying playing it and occasionally running into it and seeing other people on Reddit be like, "Hey guys, Kara's good again," and post this deck. And I think Embla has, although she doesn't look like much, reading the spoiler, it's like, what? Really? They wasted that sprite on that? Actually, she's really good. And it's always nice when a big, splashy legendary actually works.